What's going on, guys? The Duelist Crown 15 hat format online tournament has just wrapped up, and as usual, I am here to cover the hat format coverage of it, the tournament review, look at what decks entered, look at the top 2 deck lists for this event, and see if there was anything interesting or tech choices or anything like that in this event. Now, speaking of this event, it only had 13 players, and usually the Duelist Crown tournaments, they do have a pretty sizable amount of entrants, and so seeing 13 is kind of interesting, but what is a little different is this one was a double elimination single day tournament, whereas the last Duelist Crown tournament was a multi-day Swiss event. So the difference in the tournament style can kind of be a little off-putting for certain people, which is why we might see the lower numbers, as well as there are still other events going on at the moment, and so that definitely could play a part in the lower numbers here. Obviously, if someone doesn't have, today free to actually participate, it might be a little harder for them to enter, whereas a Swiss event, usually there's somewhere around 24 to 48 hours to play each round, and so it's a lot easier to actually work that into your schedule. But enough about the tournament itself. Obviously, again, this was a tournament that was held through Format Library and through the Format Library Discord server, which you should definitely check out if you're interested in playing in these tournaments, as well as check out the Hat Alliance Discord server. I should have that linked in the video description if you want to join that. There's several other tournaments that you guys can enter, but anyways, again, let's get into this. So again, 13 players, and here is what people chose to play for this event. There were 2 Artifact Traptrix decks, 2 other decks. I'm not entirely sure for this event what these were, but I'm sure if I look at, all the results from it, I could probably figure that out since there weren't that many participants. There was 1 Ghost Strick, 1 Lightsworn ruler, 1 Heraldic Beast, 1 Mythic ruler, 1 Madolche artifact, 1 Geargia, 1 Constellar artifact, 1 Artifact Ghost Strick, and 1 Constellar. So I guess the biggest takeaway from this is looking over this, obviously Artifact Traptrix takes up one of the larger slices, which is usually the case. The other thing is we only saw 1 Geargia, and other than that, there were no Mermail, and if I'm seeing this right, there were no Spellbook either. And I guess, it was only 13 players, but at the same time, you would assume that someone would go with, Mermail or Spellbook, given how dominant of a deck it can be. And besides that, though, it is a pretty solid mix of decks for the amount of players. And so, yeah, nothing really standing out all too much. No Infernity either, but Infernity, sometimes it can show up, sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, so that was the breakdown for the event. So let's actually go and look at what decks took first and second place. So here we have it, and in first place was Constellar. So nice to see Constellar, popping back up. I'm not entirely sure if this is Constellar or Constellar Artifact, so we'll definitely have to take a look at this list and see what it was. And then in second place was that Madolche Artifact deck, which is also another deck that I remember it back in 2014, people trying that out, but I feel like I haven't actually seen it, performing as much in more modern hat format. So also this should be extremely interesting. And yeah, not a whole lot to say there. Let's actually go and take a look at these lists. So here we have the first place Constellar list, and right away I can tell this is basically pure Constellar, which is something we haven't really seen too often in modern hat format. Usually the ones that are topping are going to be those Constellar artifact lists. And, another thing I'm noticing right away before I go into the breakdown is I don't even see instant fusion, which is usually like a staple almost in the Constellar decks, just as an extra extender, since sometimes this deck is a little more reliant on its normal summon. So extremely interesting to see that, but let's quickly go through the card by card before we get more into it. Obviously, starting out with the monsters, they played 1 copy of Bear, 3 copies of Algiady, 3 Koss, 3 Pollux, 3 Sombre, and 2 Maxi in the main. For the spells, they played 1 Dark Hole, 3 Tenki, 2 Lance, 1 Mind Control, 1 Rhoda, 2 Soul Charge, and 3 Upstart. And for the traps, we see 1 copy of Bottomless, 2 copies of Breakthrough Skill, 1 Compulse, 2 copies of Dimensional Fissure, or Dimensional Prison, my apologies, 2 copies of Fiendish Chain, 1 Warning, 1 Torrential, and 2 copies of Wiretap. So looking at this, obviously, I like seeing the 1 copy of Bear as a additional search target for the Tenkis, which, you know, it gives it a little more options in case you don't want to be searching your copy of Cost, whether that's you opened it or in general you don't need another copy or something. We see 2 copies of Max C in the main, which is like a fine ratio. I always like 2 ofs. And seeing that they chose the Max C means they were probably more afraid of the heavier combo decks or the decks that can kind of pop off a little more than they were afraid of, say, the cards that would have graveyard effects, which is why I kind of already see here that they are siding the Crows. And it makes sense because a lot of decks have been playing the hands lately, and even not, you know, the artifacts and cards like Sanctum. This is just a way to kind of dig through your deck a little deeper. So that's kind of cool to see. Also, we are seeing the 3 copies of Sombre. Obviously, this deck is more focused on the Constellar side of things, so 3 Sombres is extremely good. After that, nothing else really stands out too much. They are choosing to play the 3 copies of Upstart just for consistency reasons, and obviously the Lances help play through a lot of back row. Here, kind of going into what I said about the hands and stuff, we are seeing the Dimensional Prisons, which is just a great card for the hands. And, you know, having a mix of the Breakthrough Skills and the Fiendish Chains kind of help with that. Again, Fiendish Chain is a great card against the hands as well. And the Breakthrough Skills are also just another good way to disrupt the opponent, especially against artifacts and stuff, having that graveyard effect. And this deck can play at a slower pace, so the wiretaps are nice too. And yeah, I mean, it's a pretty solid list. It's very interesting, again, not to see the artifacts, but at the same time, the artifacts are extremely expected in any sort of hat format tournament. So, you know, it kind of was a meta call in a weird way to not play any of it. But yeah, let's move on to this side deck. Here we see the 3 copies of Crow and the 1 copy of Max C to make the playset. Love to see it. Here is the Dimensional Fissure. They chose to play 1 Chalice in the side. Kind of a weird thing to see that as a 1 of. I don't see this as a card that someone would randomly play 1 of, but I mean, it's cool to see. Maybe they just needed an extra going second card. After that, 3 copies of MST. Oh yeah, now that I look at it, they aren't playing any sort of back row removal in the main. I guess the Wiretap sort of can count as that, but in certain matchups, that's definitely good. The 2 copies of Blackhorn to debunk 1 copy of Needle Sealing and the 1 Soul Drain. Honestly, you know, it's pretty straightforward. The only thing that's a little different is that 1 Chalice, as I mentioned. And moving on to the extra deck, we see 1 Dweller, 1 Bujinte Tsukiyomi, 1 Constellar Omega, 2 Pleiades, and 1 M7, 1 Exciton, 1 Gaia Dragon, 1 Lavaval Chain, which is, I'm sure there's some good plays you can do with that, being able to send your Constellars and stuff and soul charge them back. Though, no, I mean, I guess that's kind of, I feel like I shouldn't be caught up on this, but at the same time, I feel without playing something like Call the Haunted, which is usually played, again, in the artifact build, it is a little different, but obviously still being able to stack your deck, or there's a lot of plays, I'm sure, with that as well, especially with the soul charges and stuff. The 1 101, 1 Ragna Zero, 1 Black Ship, 1 Volcasaurus, 1 copy of Shark Fortress. I feel like you don't see that as often in Constellar exactly, but it is a really cool card making, so one of your monsters can attack twice, which can steal games. And the 1 copy of Tyrus. Not playing anything like Zenmayo or anything, I guess that's fine too. I personally really like Zenmayo, especially if I'm not going to be maining any sort of back row removal like MSTs, or in a lot of cases like double Cyclones or anything like that. But honestly, really cool list. And like I said, like cool to see like a pure Constellar deck actually take an event. So yeah, not a whole lot to say there. Let's move on to that second place Madolche artifact list. All right, so for second place, here is that Madolche list that I said. starting off, same thing. I'm just going to go through the main deck and we'll talk about it from there. We see 3 copies of Moral Tech, 1 DD Crow, 3 Angeli, 2 Hoot Cake, 3 Magellin, 2 Messengelato, and 1 Mewfew, 3 copies of Maxi, 2 copies of Traptrix Mermelio, 1 Double Cyclone, 2 Instant Fusion, 2 H.A.T, 1 copy of Ticket, and 1 MST, 3 copies of Sanctum, 1 Bottomless, 2 Breakthrough, 1 Compulse, 1 Palooza, 1 Warning, 1 Torrential, 3 Trap Stuns, and 1 Traptrix Trap Hole Nightmare. So the big thing with this deck is usually when Madolche is playing the artifacts, it is going to be the smaller package that you see here, which is usually anywhere from 2 to 3 copies of Moral Tech, and then the 3 Sanctum, and usually it does opt out of the Ignitions, which obviously you can see this deck isn't playing, and that's simply because you don't have enough artifacts really to go around. It's kind of just there if you happen to see it. The one thing that I guess is a little interesting with this package is they're choosing to go with like 1 MST and 1 Double Cyclone versus playing like, a lot of times when they are playing this smaller artifact package, they'll play like 2 to 3 MST. And so I guess they just wanted the variance here in case they did, open one of these artifacts, then they would have a way to pop it themselves, as well as, in case they don't have it, having a copy of MST. So that's a little different. And obviously the other thing to note here is they wanted 4 hand traps in the main, which are obviously the 3 Maxi and 1 DD Crow. I've seen a lot of builds go with like 2 and 2, or just 1 or the other. Sometimes they'll even go with something like a Veiler as another option, but I guess with them playing the 2 copies of Mermelio, which is just kind of another consistency card, able to obviously search your Traptrix Trap Hole Nightmare or your Bottomless, it does kind of give you another monster. Though this deck does have a lot of normal summons, you can even see that they cut down on Hoot Cakes because you'd rather be able to special it off of Angeli or something. And a lot of people have even spoken of, in general, cutting this down to 2 in regular Madolche type decks or the Madolche hands list, or even cutting down on the Magellins, just because there are so many normal summons in this deck. But seeing, how heavy of a count this is, it's not crazy surprising because you do want to be able to see your monsters. There's too many times that a Madolche player will open kind of awkward hands because you do have to play so much back row and other kind of like utility pieces that you need for the deck. For example, the Chateaus and Tickets, having to play those just because it's part of the engine requirement, or even the builds that do choose to play the Palooza. Besides that, like, the Trap Stuns is very normal. This deck can combo off pretty hard, so you do want to see the way to just kind of blank your opponent's back row for a turn so you can really pop off, because cards like Tiramisu and stuff can kind of just really deal with opponents' boards well. But besides that, no, I mean, the list is cool. The Mermelios is a little bit different. And besides that, it looks good for what it is, So let's look at the side deck here. For the side deck, we see 1 copy of DD Crow, so they are choosing to have the second in case the matchup comes up. And they are choosing to side 2 Fire and 2 Ice hand. So I would assume going second when you don't really want the artifacts and stuff in, you can easily side those out because they're better going first in a lot of cases. And these are better board breakers. You can easily side those in. We see the 1 Dark Hole, 1 Mind Control, and 2 more copies of MST. So again, just a lot of really good going second cards, as well as 2 copies of Nobleman, which is good against any deck that's playing hands or Geargia and stuff. And then for the traps, they had 2 copies of Dimensional Prison. Again, just the hands are so dominant right now that this card is making a bit of a comeback. And then 2 copies of Emptiness. This card, some people try it out. Usually it's not the greatest card. It can have its moments, but with a deck like this, it's also kind of cool because you can flip this Trap Stun to make so you can combo off, and then your opponent's locked under this because during the end phase, obviously, it'll turn back on the opponent's turn. So kind of nice to see that. And let's look at this extra deck real quick. We see the 1 Fusionist and 1 Camion Wizard just as instant fusion targets. Sometimes you need a 3, sometimes you need a 4, so just having the options. 1 Dweller, 1 Pleiades, 1 copy of Direwolf, 1 Exiton, 1 Cowboy, 2 copies of Levier, and 1 Invoker. Some people prefer 2 Invoker, some people prefer 2 Levier. Here we are seeing the 2 copies of Levier, so, nothing crazy there, and it is, nice to see that. 2 copies of Tiramisu. I guess the other thing with this is some people will also choose to play like a Zen Mains or a Acid Golem, so they kind of just opted as these as the options. I already said the Tiramisu's, the 1/101, 1 Rhapsody and Berserk, and the 1 Heartland Draco. So they are on the Heartland and the Cowboy just as options, where I kind of like that because I've seen so many games recently where people just, they aren't able to close out the game because they aren't playing Cowboy and they are choosing the Heartland over it. So again, kind of nice to see that. But anyways, those are the 2 decks for this event that got first and second. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. You can let me know what you thought of this event in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like on it, comment any questions or videos you want to see in the future, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell to get notified anytime I put a new video out, share this video with your friends, and I should be back hopefully in the next few days with some more tournament coverage, as the next Moral Attack Monthly is about to be finishing up. So I should have some more event coverage to share with you on a much larger event. So look forward to that. And anyways, guys, I will see you in the next video.